Hey, what's up, y'all? All right, so I got another video, another course for you guys. This is going to be for mobility, like flexibility. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and get this going. Quick. Share my screen. All right, so as you guys probably know from now, right? I'm from Joshua Tree, so I thought I'd get some of my hometown like in the background of this photo, because these trees, man, they go in so many different directions, right? Like it might look like they're growing toward the left, but their branch might be going like far right, even like vertical, maybe even like a downward vertical, right? So I think, the Joshua tree, like very much, kind of reflects like the mobility of the spine, or what the potential of the mobility of the spine can have, right? So, in order to have, good mobility, you have to have a solid foundation. That's kind of like, well, that's kind of where we're gonna start with, right? Because these trees, they're growing, man, like they've been there for like thousands of years, right? So they already have instilled like their place in the earth, right? But the ground underneath them has been able to allow them to grow at so many different like varying angles, right? And that's what we need to have like in our ankle and our shoulders and our spine, right? Like we have to have like strong foundation in all those areas, as well as mobility. That's where we get gonna start this video with. Man, I get a little tongue tied. Be sure you guys get the paper out, maybe some pencil, because you're gonna want to take some notes on this, right? If you don't have it out already. So, what makes a strong foundation, right? For the human body, what you're looking for is muscle strength, right? Because if your muscles are weak, if you're feeling weak, you're gonna feel like, man, like things are getting wobbly, things are feeling a little shaky. You're not gonna be, stable. You're not gonna feel very, very comfortable with whatever you're holding yourself onto. And I'm starting like with the legs. So I'm thinking about the legs, but it can also be the arms, especially if you're like trying to hold a plank or like a difficult yoga pose. You also have to have like muscle endurance. So the difference between muscle strength, like you might be able to do like a single squat, right? Like lifting 200 pounds, but could you do that over and over? Could you hold that 200 pounds and like walk across the room, like a long room? Like that's more of a test of seeing like how much strength could be used over a period of time, right? So you need the muscle strength as well as motor control. What that means is for motor control is, right, like some people, like if I were to tell them to like to touch the wall in front of them, like stand close to a wall and touch it, like they might flex their shoulders, right, and like touch it like this. Or some of them might keep their shoulder exactly where it is, like flex their elbow and like touch it there, right? Like there's so many different ways to like use like any joint in the body, but it's your awareness, right? That's going to help you to use the body like the most efficient way, right? So like you need to know, maybe if you're standing on one leg and someone like slightly like nudges you, your body doesn't freak out and like go into all these different movements, where you'd be able to like make one little quick movement with your ankle or your hip and you're back to where you started, right? So we call those things active support. That's where the muscles are kind of firing, like the tendons are responding to any sort of stimulus, right? And it's communicating with the muscle to act a certain way to keep you upright. On a more passive level, right? Like these are just things that are going to kind of act as a like a guardrail to make sure that you're not like steering, going off course with whatever you're doing. That's going to be your bone health, right? That is to say, like, are my bones strong enough to withstand me, being on my feet, or maybe even like being able to walk a long period of time. Like some people end up with stress fractures because they don't have the strength in the bone to keep them up. Some people might have like bones that are so brittle, right? Like they crumble if they're going against a lot of resistance, as in the case of like going up and down stairs, so like doing a single hop. There's also going to be a ligament laxity. What that means is some people, the ligaments might be so loose, maybe from like history of ankle sprains, maybe from like throwing a football or baseball like repeatedly, right? Like the arm, the legs, what have it could be any joint really in the body. Like it starts to loosen up so much that like you can easily go this way, you can easily go that way. Like you just become like ultra flexible, right? And then those muscles are gonna have to like kick in. Your motor control, your muscle strength, your muscle endurance is gonna have to be slightly elevated in order to keep you on track. Lastly is going to be the connective tissue. So what that means is like we have fascia like all around our body. Fascia is very similar to if you ever like peeled an orange, or I say like a number of oranges, right? Like sometimes the skin like comes right off, like it's very easy, it's loose, like it's just it peels like natural, like no hassle, right? And then there's other times where, you know, I think, most times for me, right, like when the orange is like cold, right? And then that skin is like bear hugging that fruit, and I go to take off the peel, and now it's like snatching out the fruit, and I'm like, damn, man, it's like ruining my orange. Or what you find is, that the little casing surrounding the orange after the peel has been taken off, like that's all fascia. So it's going to be everything between the actual fruit and that peel. Everything in between is fascia, and that's very similar to what you have between your skin and your muscles, right? You're going to have this thing called fascia. And sometimes, depending on how we position ourselves or what we're doing, like repeatedly, like we might be teaching our fascia to put down more layers or become thick in some areas, or less thick in other areas to make us like more loose. But what does it mean to be mobile, right? Or mobile, right? Like you need the proper joint motion, right? Like some people, like they might have like scoliosis, right? And they may not be able to like get their back to bend like a certain way, or get their neck to bend a certain way, right? They might have like joint fusions, or you might have been like born a certain way, where your foot is kind of like, I dare say, like crooked. Your posture might have adapted to a very very specific way, because you sit on the couch, or you're sitting at work a very certain particular way. You might be standing a particular way, right? Like that's going to affect your mobility to move in an opposite or different way, as well as tissue hydration, right? Like in some areas, like especially like the disc, this is something that naturally happens, the disc in your spine, like they naturally become a little more dehydrated, right? So they go from being this sort of jelly, as in like a jelly donut, like you can squish one end of the donut, you can feel and almost see like that jelly move in like the opposite direction. Well, over time, right, that jelly is going to look more like jerky, where you got to press on it and there is no movement, right? It's just stiff. And that's something that happens natural, and it's not just specific to the disc in your spine, but that can be like the motions in, or the synovial fluid in your knees and your shoulders, and that's why you can sometimes get like clicking, right? Or depending on where it is, but that's how you can get clicking like in all these different parts of your body. So, the posture, kind of ties into anatomical presentation. Like you might have just been born like a certain way, right? Like where your foot is positioned one way, right? And then you have to, like how is that going to affect your mobility, right? Has there been a history of any injury? Like I treated a guy who he was in a snowmobile accident. I know I mentioned this probably in my knee pain course. He was in a snowmobile accident, and he had trouble like bending his knee all the way, right? Or treated a number of people that had like total knee replacements, right? And it just becomes difficult for them to bend their knee all the way. So that's definitely going to affect the mobility, right? Or even like your hip, you get like a hip replacement, you might feel restricted. Like how is that going to play a part, like on everything below the hip as well as everything above the hip, right? And it's going to make things more stiff for sure, or where they have to compensate a little bit more. But go back to ligaments as well as other connective tissue. Like if again, if you're very very flexible, you're going to have some very flexible. Your ligaments are going to be super loose, right? And that's going to help you to become more mobile. So ligaments could they can help with stability as well as like keeping you mobile. I have this here because like I feel like mobility is just, it's a necessity, right? To prevent injuries. Like you just need mobility to prevent injuries. And we don't think about it so much, but those athletes that we like to see on TV, most of us like to see on television or, live, like, sure, there might be like shooting the hoops, it might be going to the gym like crazy because we can see the muscles on them, but they also have like time where they're, or even hours where they're just working on mobility. And that's just to keep them going. LeBron James, for instance, man, like, dude, he takes so much time and spends that toward like doing preventative exercises, doing preventative care, to where like he hasn't had like any major injuries, right? So like this is just something to keep in mind. These two illustrations are actually illustrating, wow, that was kind of redundant, but this is illustrating the sort of protective mechanisms that they're making out in California, specifically like San Francisco. They're really all over the world, but like in major areas where there are a lot of earthquakes occurring, they have these guys in there, and what they're acting as is, we have one piece that's reacting to the world, right, or to the globe as the ground underneath it is shaking, right, and it takes that information and it correlates with the building where it's kind of acting in such a like a, either I say accentuated way, or maybe just a slowed way, where that building isn't going to be rocking at that same frequency or even amplitude as the earth or ground underneath it, right? So you get this mechanism where, again, like maybe the earth is shaking like left and right, right? Like this device is going to take that information and get it to where like that building will still like flow with it, and there's no restriction, right? If there were a restriction, right, and in this case, if there is a lack of mobility, right, between that building and the ground underneath it, then you're going to start to see some cracks in the foundation. You're going to see some cracks in the frame, right? So this is all to illustrate, again, like you need mobility, right? Like it's great to have that strong foundation, and you're definitely building toward that, but you have to have that mobility in order to keep the foundation. So, what your foundation looks like, right, or what your foundation could be created with, is the things that you're doing every day, right? So your foundation might look like, the woman on the left, where, she kind of has this sort of like C shape in her body, right? Like not moving as much, I mean, she might be going for a run after her little work on the computer, but like she's conditioning her body to be in this position, right? So like, how is this going to affect her body overall, right? Like in terms of mobility, in terms of stability, like if she wanted to do like some jumping jacks, or maybe you wanted to get into swimming, like she's going to be recruiting different parts of her body that's currently on stretch, and thus like a little weaker, right? And it's almost the same really for those who are very active, right? Like this is to reflect like those triathlon people, or anyone doing like the Ironman or something, right? Like if you're on that bike, certain muscles on that are being recruited on a bike are going to be like constantly engaged, and you're kind of training and teaching your body to behave one certain way, right? And it's the same thing with swimming, with what you're doing with your arms, right? Like you end up with some very like muscular arms, but there's going to be some things that you're not quite as able to do, right? Because you may have the mobility, but like where's the stability, where's the foundation in your shoulder? And it's the same thing for running, right? So what this is all, what I'm trying to uh, get you to think about here is like, how exactly are you conditioning your body? How exactly are you creating your foundation for movement, right? And then are you how are you instilling mobility in that? And it can work, the other way. If you're doing like a lot of yoga and you're gaining a lot of mobility, like where is the foundation? Like where is that muscle strength? Where is that muscle endurance, or where's that motor control coming from? Right. So there's always a balance between stability and flexibility, or in this case, like foundation and mobility, right? In either case, right, between the runner, between the cyclist, between this woman who's working from home, like, or just on a computer, she might be FaceTiming and doing something, you know. At any rate, they can still end up with tight muscles, right? And I'd say 9 times out of 10, or I'd say the majority of the people that I treat, they're going to be coming in with these tight hip flexors, tight pecs, um, tight, upper neck or upper back, right? And you can see that here, right? The woman on the left, her knees are closer to her chest, or her hip flexors they're going to be tight, right? Her head is a little more forward, so her upper back, she can expect some tightness or some discomfort back there. Her low back is in the neutral, it's kind of a posterior tilt. So what is that going to do, in terms of like mobility, flexibility? It's probably going to be hard to go in the opposite direction, right? We got the cyclist here, he's also rounded. He's no different really from the woman, because maybe he's more active, sure, but if he's not stretching, if he's not working on his mobility, right, like he definitely has the muscle strength, right, and motor control, whatnot. But if he doesn't have the mobility, then how is he going to be able to bring that knee like further behind him? Right now, that knee is so close to his chest. His head is so, it's like pointing with his chin right now. That's going to be a lot of strain on that upper back, as if he were to like try to look down, try to keep his head over his shoulders. That's going to be difficult, right? And it's the same thing with the runner. They're going to get tight hip flexors, tight hamstrings, tight gastrocs, right? Depending on how you run, you might get like some pec tightness, right? Or you're like keeping your arms in front of you. Like you're spending all this time, building up that foundation, and it's healthy, right? This person might be financially healthy. These people, they could also be financially healthy, but they might be physically healthy. But if they're not working on their mobility, then they're definitely going to see some deficits in the way that they're able to move. So again, like the major hip flexors, these are like, I'd say like maybe 75, 80% of the sort of treatment that I give like in the clinic. Like most people are coming in with some tight hip flexors, and they're like, all right, well, like what is that? Like what are the hip flexors? Right. So again, you can always go back to look at this course and share this with friends, but I definitely write this down so you can go ahead and do like your own investigative work and see how this like works. Right. Like you might feel like, I don't believe this guy, you can go ahead and fact check me. But what you're looking at is the iliacus and psoas major primarily, right? Because these two muscles, they're right at your pelvis, or starting at your low back, and they connect to your hip, right? And if they get really, really tight, as in the case of running, as in the case of cycling, as in the case of just sitting for long periods of time, right? Like then it's going to continue to pull at that low back or pull that pelvis to where you're doing like an anterior tilt. If you checked out my spine course, that anterior tilt is going to put a lot of pressure on that low back, right? So you're going to have to like loosen that up. And I'm going to show you exactly how to do that in a bit. You also have the rectus femoris muscle, right? And this is going to be the muscle that crosses the hip as well as the knee. So I guess some people, they're like, well, I sit differently than other people. They might sit with they might sit with their knees extended, or they might say that, look, I don't even sit at all. Like I stand all the time at work. And I say, all right, like show me how, right? And they stand with their knee locked. So now their knee is extended and they still have that anterior pelvic tilt, right? So long as they have the anterior pelvic tilt, like that hip is flexed, in my opinion, right? So they got the knee extension, they got the hip flexion, right? And that's all that the rectus femoris does. So if you're maintaining that position, then that muscle is constantly being used. So it's going to get tight, make that difficult. The tensor fascia lata, this is your TFL muscle, right? So a lot of people, when they're trying to like stretch the IT band, when they're trying to foam roll the IT band, they really should be targeting this guy. The IT band has a very finite length, right? Like it doesn't actually stretch, it doesn't get any shorter, so it doesn't tighten. But this muscle does, and it's directly attached to the IT band, right? Does that make sense? So, the IT band might be here, the TFL might be here. This guy doesn't move, it doesn't like stretch, it has a finite length. But if this muscle is contracting, then the IT band will move, right? Like it's being pulled upon, but it's not stretching, right? And that's how you can get, some pain either in the front of your hip or down toward your knee. So you say, all right, I had enough of this guy. I don't even want to know what type of hip flexor stretches, he wants me to do. And you go online, you go on Google, you're like, all right, I'm gonna do some hip flexor stretches. So this is what I looked up. Like I didn't cherry pick, like these are some of the very first exercises that came up for hip flexor stretch, right? And if you know your anatomy, then you're probably laughing at some of these stretches, right? Because they're actually not stretching the hip. So this woman at the far left, this is in the position that she's in, she's actually going to be tightening up her hip flexors. Why? Because her knees are still in front of her body, right? Anytime your knee is in front of your body, you're going to be looking at hip flexion. You want the knees behind you. Also, because they're out to the side, that's going to be that TFL muscle that's going to get short the most, right? So you take this woman down here, again, this is a hip flexor stretch. I get this so often, people think they're stretching the hip flexors, right? Because they feel so tight in the front. So what they do, they bring their knees toward their chest and it doesn't feel tight anymore. Why? That's because they've already taken something that's already being like short and they're shortening it further. So they don't have that feeling anymore. They go to stand up and it just comes right back over time. Like they're not doing anything. And again, the knees are close to the chest. And that's the same thing with the woman in the middle. I'd say the two on the right, they somewhat get a pass, right? Because it looks like, oh yeah, like they got the knee up to the chest on, they got the right knee up to the chest for the guy, the left knee up to the chest to the woman. Like they're doing it wrong. In all fairness, if that left leg, right, the guy's left leg, it is like more in neutral. I think if he had that more extended, it would definitely be like a hip flexor stretch. And the same thing for the woman. If that right knee is being extended or even like further away from her, like behind her, she could definitely get a hip flexor, get a stretch in the hip flexor. But in my opinion, like all these are definitely wrong. I'm gonna show you guys how to do it right. So the first thing you want to do to loosen up those hip flexors is you want to learn how to do a pelvic tilt if you don't know already, right? So to do this, you're going to have to, you go ahead and put your hand on the two small knobs on like your lower back, right? And you're going to get those small knobs to roll down and away from you. And that's pretty much like tucking your tail in. I won't spend too much time on that. There's like a bunch of videos online and none of them will actually lead you astray like those illustrations on the last page. I just figure out how to do like a pelvic tilt. You can do this in standing, sitting, lying down, what have you, but you always want to make sure that that back is in neutral, right? During sitting, standing. For stretching, you want that to be in a posterior tilt, right? So the woman at the bottom left, she's lying on her side, on her left side, and she's pulling that knee behind her body, right? Like that knee is not up to her chest. She's trying to create the greatest amount of distance between her knee and her chest. And now she's bringing that heel up to her butt. Oh my gosh, man, this is a great stretch. I do this before I go to bed every night. And sometimes when I wake up in the morning, depending on how I feel, right? Like this is definitely going to get you feeling a lot more loose, right? A lot of people that think they're doing a quad stretch, I get these runners that come in and they're like, yeah, I'll stretch my quad. I don't understand why I got this pain in my hip and my knees. I'm like, all right, like show me how you're doing it, right? And they find out that their knee is all the way to the side or like still in front of their body, like closer to the chest. So what I do, I tell them to bring their knees closer together, try to keep their back straight, maintain that posterior pelvic tilt. And at that point, they need to like hold on to something because they never did this stretch like this before, right? So they got their knees together, and now the leg that they're trying to stretch, they're bringing that knee behind, right? The standing knee, and you're gonna feel a stretch like you just haven't before, and that's gonna be your rectus femoris and your tensor fasciae lata muscles, right? Because those muscles, like what was that, uncompeted, they're gonna go up in front and out to the side. But so long as you bring that in closer to the body or even like behind you, you're gonna feel the stretch that you actually been looking for. Just make sure you stay in that posterior tilt. The guy here, for a lot of people, you know, being in these positions, the last two positions that I mentioned, like that can be a bit of a struggle, right? So I have these other two illustrations here. This guy, he's lying on his back. You know, he has one knee put up to his chest, but that's really to make sure he's not putting a strain on his back, right? And now he's bending that back knee, or the knee that's hanging toward the ground, right? So he's bending that knee, but it's sticking like pretty close to him, right? To where it doesn't like fall or go out to the side or away from him. So long as he bends that knee, like he's going to feel a stretch in his hip flexor and down toward his knee, right? And you can do this on your bed, you can do this on your couch. Like it's definitely going to get you like all loosened up. The same thing could be said when lying on your stomach, right? Like you may not have that flexibility to go into any other position rather than like damn, I'm getting like tongue tied. I'm not sure if y'all can hear that background noise right now, but like I can. I just, you know, just hope that you can ignore that for a second, if you know, if you can at all. But you're going to be pulling that heel up towards your butt, right? So the closer you bring that heel up towards your butt, the closer you bring those knees, and the more you keep that hip into posterior tilt, like you're tucking that tail in, you're going to feel a stretch like you just never felt before, and it's going to for sure feel good. So I mentioned the knee flexors as well as the hip flexors. These are going to be your hamstrings and your gastrocs, right? So the hamstrings, they start really at your sit bone, right? You'll know what this is if you sit on a hard surface, especially if you're sitting like upright, right? And they're going to go actually past, you know, the back of your knee onto your lower leg. And the gastrocs, they're going to start at the back of your upper leg and going down to your Achilles tendon. I really should have added the soleus muscle too. This is a muscle like right underneath the gastroc, and that guy can get tight as well, right? So this is going to come from those who are like sitting for long periods of time. Definitely for those who cycle or run, right? And you know, it could be any other exercise where the hamstrings are involved, and that's pretty much everything you do, right? From like squatting to going up and down stairs. So again, I do a Google search, and what do I get? Right? I get this guy at the left, like his knee is still bending, right? So that's not actually stretching, right? The back of his leg, right? We got this guy who I can't even help you. I don't even know what the hell he's doing. And you get this guy in the middle, you know, he might be stretching like the proximal end, right? Like the start of the hamstrings, like where it's at the sit bones. But like if he's still like bending his knees, then like he's still shortening his hamstring at the other end. This woman, she's like using her other leg to pull the leg that she wants to stretch like backward, but this isn't actually like loosening up her hamstring or her gastroc. The guy on the floor, he's just like he's actually using his hamstring to pull the towel down, or maybe he's just using gravity to allow that towel to come down. Either way, that gastroc and the hamstring are really getting a stretch. Unless you're talking about like the proximal end of the hamstring. So again, these are all things that are coming up on Google, and that's what I mean. Like so much of this information is so unfiltered. You know, anyone can just throw anything up there, right? And it's like why? Because I treat so many clients, they come into me like, hey, I looked this up on the internet and, you know, I've been doing it. And I'm like, man, please don't ever do that again. Like, I don't ever want to hear you do that again. Tell your friends and family, don't ever, 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 ever do that again. right? And this is why I made this course. I take all this very expensive information, I'm giving it to you guys for dirt cheap, right? So instead, some other things that you can do. I see so many people using that stretch strap wrong, where the leg that this woman has down, they might be bending instead. Like you're not going to get as much of a stretch there. What you need to do is keep that knee straight. Even her knee is like slightly bent, but it's good enough for this video, right? Like she wants to keep that knee straight, and she absolutely wants to be pulling those toes or her foot like down toward her chest or toward her head, right? The more she does that, she's definitely she's gonna have some different feeling hamstrings and gastrocs, right? And there's different variations you can do too, where she could like rotate her foot or her leg like more in or out, and she could target like more of her lateral or medial hamstring or gastroc, right? In any case, like she's holding for 30 seconds. This woman here, I'm sure everyone has seen the stretch in the center of this page. Like she has her leg back, her feet should be pointing in the same direction. Like some people they bring that leg back and it's like they're shooting out to the side, and then like never really stretching, like that lateral gastroc, right? The way that they should, right? So she has that foot like well enough behind her that heel stays down, right? And then she just leans forward, keeping that heel down. She's gonna feel that stretch like at the back of her lower leg, right? And then she's gonna hold that for 30 seconds. What I mentioned earlier, that soleus muscle, this is the muscle underneath that gastroc, right? Like that can also be tight. So you really do the same thing. Like that leg is still behind you, still pointing in the same direction. The heel is still down. All you're doing here is just bending that knee slightly, right? And then you're gonna feel a stretch a little closer to the Achilles. I say if you have like a history of like an Achilles tear or any sort of like ankle injury, like you might want to go about this slowly, right? And same thing for like the hip flexor stuff. If you got like a hip replacement, you might have, like some people are born with like some like different like genetic or like dispositions where their hips are like more shallow or whatnot. Like it's so easy for it to like dislocate. Like be smart about it. There's this guy here. This is a really intense stretch for the gastrocs as well as the hamstring. Even he, like again, this photo is like good enough to where I can like talk you through and how to do it correctly, but even this is somewhat wrong. Or he has his foot up against the wall, which is fine, right? But you actually need to bring that heel closer to, or I say the heel. You need to bring that hip closer to or even over that heel, right? And the more that you do that, then the more that that hip is going to be like further extended, right? And you're going to get a really, really good stretch out of that hamstring and out of that gastroc, right? What you can also do, like you did with like this woman did with the stretch strap, or as I described, you could just rotate that foot inward or outward, right? And go back to doing that stretch. And wherever you feel the most tightness, like that's where you hold the stretch. Again, all of these are like 30 seconds, but you can always do more. You can always do more. And with any stretch, it should be gentle, right? Like it shouldn't feel like a strain or like, tight or, like, I don't know. It should be friendly. Like every stretch, anything you do for your body should be friendly. There's also like the downward rotators of the shoulder, right? So what these guys are doing are like bringing the head or the shoulder like down and forward. And the problem with that is again, like you start to get like some pain in the middle or the upper aspect of your neck or back. So the main muscles that do this are the latissimus dorsi. It's crazy. This is like a huge muscle. It goes all the way down to like your tailbone and goes all the way up to your arm. Man, I feel sorry, man. Like these are the sounds of New York, man. It's in New York City. It's crazy if y'all could hear that. It's wild. But yeah, like this muscle, that latissimus, is gonna come all the way like up from underneath here, and it's gonna be wanting to pull that shoulder down, and that's why they help you to climb or do like some pull-ups or pull downs. So it's a huge muscle, huge, huge, huge. Often very, very tight. You also have the pec minor, it's muscle like right in through here. If you were to put your hand like underneath your chest, right? It kind of starts like right in through there, right? And it goes all the way over to your arm. That's the pec major, and it also to like the front side of your shoulder blade, right? So if that muscle is tight, then it's going to be pulling that shoulder blade again down and forward, downward rotators of the shoulder. Same thing with the levator. I mentioned this in the spine course, in the spine course that I have. I hope you guys are looking, at all these guys, because I feel like all of them will help. Just in terms of like fitness and like health literacy. Um, Again, this is like all information that I've gathered from Columbia. So you could tell all your friends in a way you paid, you know, very, very less to get a very, very expensive education, or less than what I paid, right? So again, I go on Google. What do I see? It's the same thing. To like loosen up the shoulders, so loosen up like my upper back, loosen up the chest or the pec. And like I'm not seeing a lot that actually does that. The woman at the top left, maybe your right arm, she's able to get some stretch out of her pec as well as her latissimus. So, I'm actually not going to give her too much grief like that. That's actually not bad. That left arm, on the other hand, that's not going to help, right? Because the shoulder is still going into downward rotation. The guy at the bottom left, he's going into full internal rotation. Most of these muscles that downwardly rotate the shoulder, they're also going to be like internally rotating, like in a small but meaningful way, right? And that's exactly what you get. This guy, his shoulders are downward sloping, like they're not going up, they're going down, right? So those muscles are only tightening. She might be doing some good work, like for her pec, the woman in the middle of the screen, but because their arms are like down and back, that lat is going to be tightened up. They're also somewhat like internally rotated. If she were to have just like rotated her hands like more outward to where her fingers are pointing away or even behind her, she might be able to get like a better stretch. The guy at the top right, again, might be a good stretch for the pec. Definitely the lat. Um, what's my issue with this? Maybe that left arm. It might just be like poor efficiency, the stretch. The last woman on the bottom right, she's doing a thread the needle technique. I actually like this technique. First time I had to demonstrate this to a patient, I got super lost. Man, my mentor was like, "What the hell are you doing?" Because I didn't know exactly like what to target. Right? It was just like, "Hey, do this exercise," and I'm going through the motion. I'm like, "Man, I don't really feel anything." Right? But it was over the years after taking some courses, that I was able to actually, able to put like a few stretches that I'm going to show you now together. That it's actually very efficient in terms of time. So really, what all you have to do? Oh, you see that? I got a picture of me right in the middle. Maybe I'll start with that one because that's the levator stretch, the one at the upper back. This is a muscle that connects the head and neck to the shoulder. So what this muscle is going to do, right, is again, it's going to be downwardly rotating. So what do? I get that arm to go up, right? So now it's upwardly rotating, and then I can stretch it by just pulling my head and neck over to the side, and I'm bringing my nose down to my armpit, like to the opposite side that I'm stretching, right? And I'm holding that again, 30 seconds. Damn, I done screwed up. I got the same woman at the bottom right. That's my fault, y'all. You do not have to do that. I don't know what the hell I was thinking. My fault. But the woman at the top right, she's doing a pec stretch, right? So she has her arm like right at the doorway, and she just walking through, forgetting it. It doesn't really matter like what foot you put in front, just so long as there's a foot like in front of that arm, right? And then you're just gonna turn away like to the opposite side, right? And you're gonna definitely feel like a really, really good stretch in that pec. What you could also do is just bring the arm like slightly up or slightly down, right? And just look for an area where it's more tight. You might have more tightness here, like at the lower fibers, versus here at the upper fibers, right? Of that pec minor, pec major muscle. So, search a little. The woman at the on the left, or the two women on the left, they're stretching out their lats. The woman at the top, she's just finding another doorway. So, you know, a lot of these stretches you could do right in the middle of the doorway, right? And you come to the side of it to where you're gripping it like this, right? And then you just walk backwards. You walk backwards, so you start to feel a little stretch like right there on the side. And that's where she's feeling it on my left, right? And same thing could be done for this woman who's in this child's pose position. Not really a fan of the child's pose position because I feel like that's too much flexion of the spine for me. But I get it, you know, everything in moderation. What she wants to do though, let's say she wants to stretch the right side or her right lat. What she wants to do, instead of like, or before she dips her hips like down toward her heels, she's gonna walk her arms all the way over to the left, right? And like plant her hands there. And then she sits her hips down and back, right? And from there, she's definitely gonna feel a stretch down toward her right lat, or maybe even up to her arm, just depending on where like most of that tightness is, where most of those fibers are, right? It goes back to that sort of orange peel, right? Like it might be a loose toward the bottom of that orange, but you get to like the top, or you know, at the other side or opposite side of that orange, and things are like kind of stiff, right? Lastly, I wasn't going to let you guys go with just like loosening up some muscles. You definitely want to be loosening up the spine, right? Because the low back is connected to your neck, right? The upper back is connected to your low back. It's connected to your tailbone. It's all really one thing, right? So you can't affect one area without affecting another, right? So it's just something you have to keep in mind. Also, it's just the root of all movement. When you think about moving your arm like in space, like you have to be grounded in your spine before you can do anything, right? And lastly, like as far as these muscles, man, like if those pec muscles are pulling you forward, right? The levator anterior levator scapulae muscles pulling your head and neck forward. Like what does that do to your hip? Like generally speaking, like all those things are going to want to get closer and closer together, right? So you gotta loosen all this stuff up. Like you can't just focus on one thing. So a couple things you can be doing at home. One thing is, you know, very, very simple. It's just getting the head to move. People, you know, complain of like a stiff neck. Like just keep moving it. You know, how else do you expect to get things going again, right? Like you think of like trying to open up like a tight jar, right? Like you just keep going, you keep going, right? And the next person comes through, they open it up, they're like, yeah, I loosened it up for you. How did you do that? Well, like you already started like getting it going, right? You just kept moving. Well, that's how you can loosen up the neck. And it's the same thing with, you know, the upper back or the lower back. You know, if you feel like it's stiff, but you know, you might just have to go in a different direction. So my guy here at the bottom left, you know, he's lying completely on his side, right? This is kind of like an open book exercise. He's completely on his left side, right? He brings his right knee over and across, like towards his chest. This is temporary. It's not really like to target the hip flexors. We're talking about the spine here. And it opens up. So he has his hip going in one direction, right? And his chest and upper body going in an entirely different direction, right? And that's going to loosen up his lumbar spine, as well as his thoracic. And because he's moving his head too, his cervical spine, right? So all he has to do in order to switch this up to get like loosened up the spine at different angles, he could just bring that knee like further away from him, like more in line with his opposite leg, not completely straight, or you know, maybe if you want to, but you do that whole thing all over again. You just open up your chest all over again. You'll find that that'll target like different areas, right? So at the top, you know, at the center of this slide here, this woman, it looks like she's doing like a prone press up, like to target her low back, because that's often seen like in the media or on Google or on yoga or whatnot. But she's actually loosening up her upper spine, right? So what she's doing here, she's trying to get this bone like right in through here, like in contact with the ground, while she lifts everything up, like towards the ceiling or you know, right in front of her, right? And by doing so, she's going to be getting a lot of pressure right in her mid back, right? And what she's trying to do is reverse that C shape, you know, that we see very often with people who are sitting like with poor posture. She's going in the opposite direction. The guy, he's doing the same thing just with his low back. The guy in the bottom and the center doing the exact same thing. you're just going backward, right? And for some people, they go so far forward, like they keep going forward, and never go back enough, right? So I have them go back, and then I'm like, all right, let's try this. Then we're like going back and then to the right. Like what happens when you go back and then to the left? And I'm like, oh yeah, like that hurt. I'm like, cool, keep going in that direction, man, because that's where it's stiff, right? Your body is saying pain because you don't know how to interpret that other than, just pain. You don't know what stiffness really feels like because you've been going like this for forever, right? So I just have them do that number of times. Any of these stretches, any of these mobility tips, you can do this forever, right? Like you can't OD on this. Like just keep going. The guy on the bottom right, he's doing the same thing, just going to the side instead of going backward. You can again combine those motions. That's kind of what the guy at the top right is doing. I love this stretch. This is called scorpion stretch. All right, so he's like lying on the stomach. He's got his arms to like counterbalance. He's gonna lift up his right leg, right, his heel, his right heel. He's gonna bring that up and back and toward the side, his opposite side. Right, and then you can definitely get some Rice Krispies along your spine in a really good way. A lot of snack, crackle, pop, right? Like loosen that guy up. And again, you can do that over and over and over and over for like 30 minutes. You stand up, brand new. So that's it, man. Like that's how you can loosen up like the whole body, right? Like whether you're preparing for a sitting marathon or the actual marathon, like an Ironman or something. Like these are different things that you want to be doing to make sure you stay loose, you have that mobility so that there's no cracks in your foundation, right? So definitely create a stretch and mobility day if you don't have one already. If you're going to the gym like 3 or 4 times a week, you find a day like right in the middle, right? Where you're going like 3 times a week. Maybe it's like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Like pick a Tuesday or Thursday, you just do mobility work. Maybe it's a Saturday, Sunday, you just do mobility work. Or you're just loosening things up. That way you can keep going without like getting your body to go in one specific direction. Stay balanced. It's really it. But that could also mean, if you're going to the gym, you're doing a lot of bench press, right? Like you're getting your arms, your shoulders, your elbows to keep going in front of you, right? In order to create balance so that that pec muscle doesn't, continue to grow tight. Like bring that elbow behind you, like do some rows, do some like prone T exercises, right? Like go in the opposite direction so that, you may not even have to do a mobility day. You can keep on lifting and just go in the opposite direction. Keep everything balanced. Lastly, just keep moving, man. You don't ever want to keep your body like going nowhere, really. But like just keep moving. That's the easiest way to just stay flexible. And that's why I had to add this image because the wind or the air that's going through this waving costume guy, like it's always going, right? And you see him like flip-flopping all these different directions. That's how you stay loose. That's how you stay loose. That's how you're gonna keep on grinding and doing what you want to do. Lastly, if you have any questions, please contact me. You have my email, you have my phone number. I'm really sorry about the music. That was like too distracting. Just reach out to me, man. Sirens is too distracting. Reach out to me, email me, call me, text me. Texting might be a little faster. But tell your friends, tell your family members. If you have any questions, you might have like a certain condition that's like, hey man, I don't know if I should be doing this. Like, what's your opinion? Reach out to me. I have no problem with that. And of course, if you have any suggestions or any like sort of injuries that you'd like for me to address, reach out and I'll see what I can do about getting a video out there for you. All right. Till then, best of luck. Have fun. Stay mobile. Don't let any cracks form in the foundation. All right. Best of luck.